In the summer of 2018, a virus slipped across China's border and began killing pigs faster than anyone could count them. It didn't harm a single human being, but for pigs, it was close to a death sentence, and there was no vaccine to stop it. Within about a year and a half, more than half of the largest pig herd on Earth was simply gone. Roughly 225 million animals, dead or cold to stop the spread. Pork sits at the center of nearly every Chinese meal, and the country eats close to half of all the pork on the planet. So when the herd collapsed, prices rocketed. In a single year, they climbed by around 110%, and a nation of 1.4 billion people suddenly struggled to feed itself the one meat it could not do without. The obvious answer was to build more farms, but China was running out of cheap, safe land to put them on, and every new open-air farm was one more door left ajar for the virus to walk back through. So a single company tried something the rest of the farming world called reckless. Instead of spreading pigs out across the countryside, they stacked them into a tower. 26 floors of pigs, one level piled on top of the next, inside a single building taller than most city apartment blocks. People said disease would rip through it like fire through a barn. They were wrong. Today, that tower raises well over 1 million pigs a year behind sealed, virus-proof walls. And a second one, just like it, is already rising next door. This is the story of how China turned a few hectares of hillside into the biggest pig farm ever built under one roof. On the southern edge of Ezhou, a mid-sized city in the central province of Hubei, the building climbs out of the ground, looking like a corporate headquarters. Gray, blocky, 26 stories of concrete and steel, with rows of small vents where you'd expect to see office windows. Drive past it on the road and you would never guess what lives inside. The numbers are hard to hold in your head. Around 800,000 square meters of floor space, close to 112 football pitches, lifted off the ground and stacked into the sky. That's almost 4 times the floor area of the Empire State Building, handed over entirely to pigs. At any single moment, the building is designed to hold up to 650,000 of them. Run at full capacity, it can send 1.2 million pigs to slaughter every year, all from a patch of land smaller than the parking lot of a large shopping mall. Its owner is a company called Zhongxin Kaiwei, and when the tower opened at the end of 2022, it became the largest single-building pig farm in the world. That should have been the headline. Instead, the same company was already pouring the foundations of a second, identical tower right beside the first. One skyscraper of pigs was only the beginning. To grasp why anyone would build such a thing, you have to go back to just how bad 2018 really was. African swine fever reached China on the 3rd of August 2018. The disease is almost harmless to humans and brutally efficient against pigs, and to this day, there is no reliable vaccine for it. It spreads through the smallest contact: contaminated feed, a scrap of infected meat, the boots of one worker, the tires of a single truck, even a speck of dust carried on the wind. That is exactly the kind of enemy a traditional pig farm is helpless against. An old-style farm sprawls low across open land, with animals, feed trucks, and people flowing in and out from dawn to dusk. Every one of those movements is a way in. Against a virus that travels on a boot print, all that openness turns into a fatal weakness. By the time the outbreak peaked, the damage was staggering. China's national pork output fell from about 54 million tons in 2018 to roughly 40 million the year after. For a government that treats pork almost like a strategic resource, keeping a national reserve of frozen pork the way other countries stockpile oil, a shortage on this scale was more than an inconvenience. It threatened prices, tables, and tempers all at once. The instinct was to rebuild, and to rebuild fast. But 2 problems stood in the way, and they pointed in opposite directions. Land near China's cities was scarce and costly, so there was nowhere obvious to put thousands of new farms. And even if the land had existed, scattering thousands of low barns across the countryside would only have created thousands of fresh weak points for the next wave of infection. The country needed to raise far more pigs on far less land, while sealing every last animal away from a virus that could arrive on a breath of air. On paper, those goals were at war with each other. Something had to give. The breakthrough came from thinking about a pig farm less like a field and more like a fortress. If the real danger was contact with the outside world, then the way to protect a herd was to shrink that contact down to almost nothing. And the way to do that, without swallowing endless acres of land, was to build up instead of out. Take the sprawling farm, tip it on its end, and stack it toward the sky, so that each floor could be sealed off from the world and from every other floor. A company in the southern province of Guangxi had already been quietly testing the idea. On Yaji Mountain, a firm called Yangshan began raising pigs in multi-story blocks, first 7 floors high, then 13, treating every building as a vertical quarantine zone. The logic underneath it was simple enough to fit in a sentence. A pig that never leaves a sealed floor never meets the virus. Stack enough of those sealed floors on top of one another, and you can match the output of a vast, sprawling farm from a single hillside. The blocks on Yaji Mountain became a working proof of the concept, a cluster of high-rises with the capacity to turn out around 840,000 pigs a year. It worked well enough that the rest of the industry started to pay attention. And in Ezhou, watching all of this, Zhongxin Kaiwei made a bolder decision than anyone before them. They would go all the way to 26 floors, nearly double the tallest tower anyone had dared to build. Plenty of people thought they had lost their minds. To many in the industry, packing hundreds of thousands of pigs into one structure sounded like the worst imaginable answer to a disease crisis. Critics called it every egg in one basket. If a pathogen ever slipped past the defenses, it wouldn't burn through a single barn and stop. It could take down 650,000 animals inside one building. Animal welfare groups condemned the towers as cruel, arguing they sentenced pigs to a life with no soil, no sky, and no room to be pigs at all. And a third group pointed at the raw arithmetic of waste, at the rivers of manure a herd that size would produce every day, and asked a very practical question: where on earth is all of it going to go? Every one of those doubts was fair, and every one of them had to be answered for the tower to work at all. So how do you actually run a 26-story pig farm without it becoming a catastrophe? It begins, like everything in this building, with keeping the outside out. Any worker who wants to reach the animals passes through a routine that belongs in a laboratory more than a farm. They shower, strip, and change into clean clothing and boots kept only for the inside. They walk through disinfection chambers before they ever lay eyes on a pig. Delivery trucks are washed and sterilized before they approach. Feed is piped in rather than hauled through the door by hand. The whole entrance is built as a clean line the virus is not allowed to cross. Beyond that line, the tower splits into floors, and each floor is its own separate world. Airtight doors seal one level away from the next. Industrial filters scrub every breath of incoming air, so that a floor near the top of the building breathes air that has never so much as touched the floor beneath it. Each level runs on what the industry calls an all-in, all-out system. A batch of pigs moves onto a floor together, grows there together, and leaves together. And only then is the whole floor stripped down, cleaned, and disinfected before the next batch arrives. If infection ever does appear, the design is meant to trap it on one floor, like a fire behind a closed steel door, instead of letting it loose through the entire herd. Moving the pigs through this vertical city is its own feat of engineering. Cargo lifts big enough to carry around 60 animals at a time raise them to their assigned levels. Breeding sows and their piglets live on some floors. Growing pigs fatten on others, so that a single tower holds every stage of a pig's life stacked above your head. Feed makes the opposite trip. It is delivered high in the building and fed downward through automated lines so that tens of thousands of animals can be fed at the press of a button from a central control room. That control room is the true brain of the place, and it looks nothing like a farm. Banks of screens glow in a quiet, air-conditioned space, while, somewhere in the concrete above, hundreds of thousands of animals eat and sleep. Sensors read the temperature, humidity, and airflow on every floor and correct them automatically, floor by floor. Cameras and robots watch the pens around the clock, scanning for the faint, early fever that might be the first hint of disease, flagging a sick animal long before a human walking the aisles could ever spot it. A handful of staff, sitting at those screens, can oversee a living population the size of a small city. None of this came easily, or cheaply. The earliest high-rise farms had to solve problems an ordinary barn never faces. Air that would have simply drifted off across an open field now had to be filtered, cooled, and pushed through dozens of floors without ever carrying infection upward from one to the next. Ventilation, waste removal, and temperature control all had to be reinvented for a building packed with living animals stacked on each other's heads. The towers cost far more to build than a conventional farm ever would, and when pork prices later slumped, some operators found themselves nursing enormous investments in half-empty buildings. This is a model that only pays off at a scale almost no ordinary farmer could ever reach, which is exactly what made the next problem so important to solve. Which brings us back to the question the skeptics kept hammering: the waste. A herd of 650,000 pigs produces an almost unimaginable volume of manure and wastewater. And in a tower, there is no field for it to quietly soak away into. So the building was designed to swallow its own filth and turn it into fuel. The waste is funneled into biogas digesters, sealed tanks where bacteria break it down in the absence of oxygen. Every ton of that wastewater can yield roughly 15 to 20 cubic meters of biogas. And once the gas is cleaned up, it runs to more than 90% methane, pure enough to burn for heat and electricity. The building, in effect, helps power itself on exactly what the pigs leave behind. And the process doesn't stop at gas. The thick slurry left over at the end is put to work as fertilizer, spread on crops in the fields around the region. The same waste the critics warned would drown the project becomes energy for the tower and food for the soil. Very little is meant to leave the site as garbage. Put every piece together, and what stands on the edge of Ezhou is a machine for making pork, at a scale the world had never seen, under a single roof. From one building, more than 1 million pigs a year, sealed away from the very virus that once emptied the country's farms. Add the Twin Tower rising beside it, and this one site alone will rival the output of an entire district of old-fashioned farms. Hundreds of kilometers away in Guangxi, Yangxiang's high-rise blocks quietly push out another 840,000 pigs a year. What started as a desperate, mocked response to a disease has hardened into a blueprint, one that China is now copying, floor by floor and city by city. Whether that blueprint is a triumph or a warning depends a great deal on where you stand. Supporters see a country defending its food supply the smart way. Less land eaten up, waste captured and burned for power, and animals sealed off from a virus that still has no cure. Critics see hundreds of thousands of pigs living their entire lives indoors, stacked in concrete, one serious failure away from disaster, alongside a mountain of methane that the climate math may never fully capture. Both of those pictures can be true at the same time, and honest people are still arguing over which one matters more. Harder to argue with is the shift in thinking underneath it all. For 10,000 years, farming has meant spreading out across the land, taking more ground to raise more food. In Ezhou, boxed in by a virus and a shortage of earth, someone looked hard at a pig farm and decided the only direction left to grow was straight up. Sometimes the answer that looks strangest from the outside is just an ancient problem met with a completely new set of rules. If stories like this make you see the modern world a little differently, subscribe to so the next one finds you. Because next time, we're traveling somewhere just as unlikely, to the frozen edge of the Arctic, where one small country is growing whole fields of bananas on the slopes.